Excuse me if my voice sounds a bit hoarse. I've been doing live commentary from FP3 and then qualifying. Quite a lot of shouting going on. What a session just back at the hotel now. Don't know where to start really. Should we start with the Red Bull issues or with the job Carlos Sainz did for Ferrari or the job George Russell did for Mercedes? Just superb. We touched on a lot of these points yesterday and they kind of all just happened as we spoke about. I mean, the really big question was whether Red Bull could get it right and whether they would continue to be in trouble. After I did the video yesterday, I went for it was about 3 in the morning here, Singapore time. I went for a coffee just to stay awake a little bit longer so that I could keep in the right time zone, and bumped into some mates from Red Bull, the team, who were just coming back from the track. And basically what I said then, I think was the case. They just felt they were running a bit conservative with ride height and didn't do the major adjustments between the two sessions because it's better to do it under, when they've got proper time to do it. It's a big job, the spring change, everything else. So they did that overnight, and the impression I got is that the car was half reasonable this morning in FP3, and they definitely had more grip. But to the point where the back was working, but then Perez started saying that the front had gone away, particularly under braking, so they tried to apply more front wing on the car to get that to balance it out. And they never really got the balance right. And in addition, Max was having a lot of trouble with upshifts and downshifts. We've seen a lot of that this year with Max. Not so much with Sergio on radio, but certainly Max on radio at various races at various times of the season has been saying problem with the upshift, problem with the synchronization of the revs on the downshift, whatever it is. And that seemed to go right through FP3, right to the point where he's doing his practice starts. In the middle of all that, Max nonetheless did put a bit of fuel in the car and went through the role of doing the homework, but nothing was really right. But he was quite quick at various stages when he was out, providing he got a free lap. But then came qualifying, and the car was not very good. It was sliding all over the place, and because of the traffic, they were having to do slow laps out just to try to get space. And then, of course, they were starting the lap without proper tyre temperature in there. Suddenly, the Red Bull was as sensitive to tyre temperatures as the Mercedes has been at various stages of this year, much more so. And the grip wasn't there. In addition, Max was getting three impeding things under investigation as I speak, which wouldn't have added to his enjoyment of the afternoon, the evening. And when it came down to Q2, absolutely the last couple of seconds, you could see even at turn 1 he didn't have the tyres up to temperature. The car was sliding. He had 2 goes at the corner. I didn't see the whole lap, but I saw the radio transmission from Max afterwards, which was pretty grumpy, really, overly so, I think, for a guy who's got this year's championship sewn up and who's had a brilliant car underneath him all year. It was along the lines of, did you see that? It was just impossible to drive, a bit over the top, really. But I thought that reaction, but not happy, to the point where Sergio Perez just lost the whole thing at turn 1, and a very inelegant spin of the type that a rather inexperienced driver would have. I mean, it was obviously just no front end from his point of view at all. So neither Red Bull made it through into Q3. Now, when I was thinking about that comment from Christian Horner about how they're not very good on 90-degree corners, of course, what he means, if I really think about it, is that a 90-degree corner isn't really a corner. It's just stop and then turn and go, and that's therefore not flattering all the things that the Red Bull's really good at, which is medium speed long corners, high speed long corners, all the downforce in the middle of the car. They can't use any of that stuff. But it doesn't mean to say that they should be any worse than anybody else through 90-degree corners. I think that's the point. That's just that I suppose they've never really been in this position under that much pressure, with also the added problem of the shift issue on Max's car. And on top of that, the popular supposition that the tougher flexi-wing regulations introduced for this race are hurting Red Bull more than any other team. Very easy to draw that conclusion. Personally, I think we should wait until after Suzuka to see if that really is the case. But none of it really, to be honest, explains how they didn't manage to get through to Q3. I mean, Max didn't get through to Q3. I mean, Sergio had the spin. And that is That is really, really odd, because he was actually bumped, would you believe, by a guy I've been lauding and saying he's got massive talent. Liam Lawson took that 10th place from him in the Red Bull financed AlphaTauri, the rookie, taking the place of Daniel Ricciardo, doing an absolutely brilliant job in that car, and he took 10th place from Max Verstappen. So an AlphaTauri out qualifying, I mean, what does that mean? It's very, very difficult. I think just everything happened, everything that could have happened did happen. Traffic, possibly, I don't know whether the gear shift thing reappeared. Certainly couldn't get the cars up to temperature. Max had traffic every time he went out, as did a lot of others though. So neither Red Bull into Q3, which opened the door wide open, of course, for a lot of teams. Not necessarily for Ferrari, because I think they would have been there anyway. So let's get on to that story, because, as I said yesterday, the other big thing is whether would Ferrari continue, and whether Carlos could continue to blow away Charles Leclerc. And he did. He did. I said yesterday, the driving of Charles looks quite edgy around Singapore, a lot more spiky than he normally looks. He's really trying hard. But Carlos has got this lovely, I'm not going to say graceful, but he's got this lovely rhythm that he's in now. It's a little bit like Rubens Barrichello at his very, very best. Just that beautiful rhythm that he can reproduce. He's got his late turn in, but I think that's actually, I mean, there are no corners here where you can really benefit from an early turn in, the short corner, all the rest of it. They're all just sort of stop-start punch corners, and in that sense, I don't think Carlos has got any disadvantage. He's probably got an advantage, because he's just braking in a straight line. He's got his late turn in, and he's getting his power on beautifully, and just doing everything really well. I mean, he's driving the Ferrari the way Lando Norris is driving the McLaren, with a little bit more edge that's come from having to find that groove that Charles Leclerc's pushed him into, if you like. Maybe Lando still has to find that little bit to be as good as Carlos right now. So to me, I mean, for Carlos to go and do that, it was absolutely perfect qualifying. I mean, Ferrari were the only team to go out with 2 new sets going into Q3. Everybody has had to run a used set on the first run. Freddie Vasseur, take a bow, that's really good planning. And other teams ran their used tyres, too many sets of used tyres, or ran them in different places. But Ferrari saved everything for Q3, because they knew what it was going to be like, I suspect. And I think when you get 2 new sets, you've got much more feel for what the tyre's going to do on that second run. And Carlos had to go out and defend that pole, having done a really good job. He's 0.3 quicker at the end of the first runs in Q3. And he hadn't done a particularly good job in Sector 1. He hadn't got the tyres quite up to temperature, but very good Sectors 2 and 3. So his job was to sort of do what he did in Sectors 2 and 3, but really make it work in Sector 1. And he did. He was really good in Sector 1, to the point where he could back off a little bit through Sector 2, but not by much, and then really give it something in Sector 3. And that added up to the pole. It was a beautifully composed lap in that sense, in that technical sense, but also in a driving sense. Beautiful to watch. And it was just like, wow, where's this guy been all this time? Just beautiful. 2 poles in a row. I can only imagine what is happening in the Sainz household back in Madrid. His dad is such a cool guy, and he's been such a supporter of Carlos, his son, over the years. I can remember sitting race after race, watching when he was at Toro Rosso, watching the start, hanging with him, everything that was going on with Carlos. He was totally into it, but the perfect father, not too involved, just enough to be there when Carlos, the son, needed it. And Carlos living in Madrid as he does, he's such a cool guy. And his physio is a really good guy as well, the English guy, son of Rupert Mannering, who used to be at Brabham and is now at Classic Team Lotus, but used to be at Lotus as well. And his son is Carlos's physio. I mean, what a cool combination. Just a normal English guy, physio, really good bloke, and lives in Madrid, completely different from the norm. Not too much shouting and screaming and everything after. I've made this point before. He's just a very, very elegant person. He's evolved into a very elegant person, I think, and driver and Formula One personality. And if you know, April, May, if you'd spoke to any Spaniard about Formula One, Fernando Alonso. And Fernando's brilliant, we know that. Not many people would have been talking about Carlos Sainz. Now, to take the pole, 2 in a row, one at Monza and then one at Singapore, which is huge for Ferrari in Asia, to be the Ferrari driver that did it, and beat the Mercedes driver, not Charles Leclerc even, beat the Mercedes driver, is a massive thing for Carlos Sainz. This is huge for him and his future and his career. This is much bigger than just a pole on a street circuit. So wow, you know, I'm really, really blown away by how good that was, that pole. And I, you know, every time George went past us in the box where I was doing the commentary in the Rolex box, and every time we saw George, it was, you know, this guy potentially is going to be on the pole. Ferrari will be fearing George Russell in the closing seconds of qualifying. And so it proved. I mean, he was just brilliant. Lewis never, ever looked like he was going to get anywhere near George. I mean, and we're only talking tenths of a second, obviously, a few tenths of a second. But that's a big margin when you're in identical cars. And a car as good as a Mercedes is this weekend, they've got their sweet spot, that's for sure. It was the same margin, actually. The difference between George and Carlos, 0.07, was exactly the same as the difference between George and Charles Leclerc, 0.07. And Lewis was not in the game, really, in terms of potentially splitting or even beating the Ferraris. But George was really, I mean, this is, I've often, we get a lot of questions on the live stream about the difference between George and Lando and where they are. And I usually come down saying that Lando's got the sort of slightly softer inputs, but George has the almost Jochen Rindt-like precision. I mean, let's convert that, you know, Ayrton Senna-like precision and judgment and fineness of detail in his driving. Slightly long corners as well, but around Singapore, doesn't matter. But you've got to add something to that now, which I've never really done, which is George has just got this unbelievable competitive instinct, hasn't he? And he just puts it on the line at exactly the right moment. Whereas Lando's just really good as well and did a great job in the McLaren, but it was just like there was something not perfectly timed about the way he put it all together, whereas it was with George. I think that was it. Under pressure, George puts the lap together perfectly. Whereas Lando possibly was a bit better in one sector than he was in the next lap and so forth. And yeah, that was the difference. I mean, George is just this pure racing driver. Brilliant to watch. Good result though. I mean, factory Mercedes just ahead of the customer McLaren Mercedes. And Lewis in P5, as I implied yesterday, the only thing that matters for Lewis is this guy in the other car who's so quick that Lewis always wants to beat, obviously, and for him to get the news that George is 0.4 quicker around Singapore, you know, that's the only thing Lewis didn't want to hear, and that's the first thing he heard. And not a good day for Lewis Hamilton, even though he starts P5, and obviously, you know, things can happen in Singapore, and he could be on a different strategy or whatever, and he could have a really, really good race tomorrow. Still looks good, but today George Russell out-qualified him big time in a good car this weekend. So that was the difference. And then, if you please, both Haas Ferraris making the top 10 when Max was in traffic and not getting a lap in and, you know, lots going on. Those guys were going out slightly earlier and getting those laps in. And it paid off for them. And then Kevin used that to get into Q3 to qualify 6th in the Haas Ferrari. What's the common factor there? Ferrari. Obviously looking good here. I mean, I wouldn't say, oh yeah, the Ferrari's got a great engine for Singapore. What I would say is that it's got quite a lot of Ferrari ethos and technology in its aero, and also obviously in its drivetrain, and therefore it'll do well too on that sort of circuit. Point and squirt, straights, rewarding it, brakes, you know, just really good. Drive it well and you'll get a result from it. And that's what we got with Kevin, and to some extent with Nico Hülkenberg. I mean, over one lap around Singapore, Kevin's probably going to be the quicker of the two, but both of them up there, what a great result for them as well. And Fernando Alonso P7 for Aston Martin. Bit disappointing, got to say. Yeah, to the background of that massive shunt for Lance Stroll, so I'll get on to it in a second. You would have thought around Singapore he might have been he would have been ahead of Magnussen anyway, but no. With an engine that was obviously good enough to be on the front row, that's quite a big sea change between the performance of the Mercedes factory chassis and the Aston Martin chassis, given the fact that the other Aston Martin ended up in the boonies anyway. So Yeah, a bit of a disappointing result, although as I've said before, I would never list Fernando as one of the great all-time single lap qualifiers, and probably it'll be different in the race tomorrow. But yeah, bit of a surprise as well. Not as much of a surprise as why Max was so slow, but a surprise that Fernando was there. Esteban Ocon, good job. He's been a little bit out of the limelight in the last few races. Pierre Gasly's had a couple of good weekends for Alpine ever since Spa, really, in the sprint race. But Esteban back into it here, and good job in what is obviously quite a difficult car, at least as difficult as the Aston Martin, right up there with Fernando, you could say. So good job for them. Pierre Gasly didn't make it through into Q3. And then there's Liam Lawson, who I keep saying is got an extraordinary talent. I said the minute he got that drive at Zandvoort and stepped into Daniel's car that you were going to see a guy with brilliant car control. And so it's proved. I mean, that was a really good lap by Lawson. And to bump Max, fabulous. And the irony, I mean, where do you start with the ironies of AlphaTauri bumping Max out? So let's get on to it then. Lance Stroll, and I suspect the adrenaline was pumping a little bit on that last run when he had to go out and do a time. And it was just a messy shunt, right rear on the curb going in, sort of Sergio Perez style, and basically the minute he was loading the car up, he was just off. And horrendous shunt. And did you see he kept his hands on the steering wheel too, which is pretty brave to do after what had happened to Daniel. Quick, of course, but nonetheless, you had time to take him off. A big shunt. And, where that leaves Lance mentally now in terms of his motivation and how much he's enjoying his Formula One remains to be seen. I guess he'll bounce back and, yeah, let's carry on. But, not happy days for him. When you think of how good he looked for a while in the Williams, and even sometimes alongside Sebastian Vettel at Aston Martin, he seems to have completely gone the other way now. And Fernando is doing what he does. A little bit disappointing as well, but just amazing to see that shunt from a driver who's been around that long now, really, and has no worries in the world because he doesn't have to worry about keeping that drive. He knows he's got it for as long as he ever wants to be in a Formula One car. So there's no pressure on him in any way, and yet he still had that shunt. So it's kind of a weird thing. That both McLarens, brilliant driving by both of them to avoid the debris from that shunt. Oscar Piastri was the nearest, and that meant that Oscar didn't get into Q2 either, and that was a great shame because I think he would have got into Q3. He would have been, 4/10 max slower than Lando from what we'd seen, and that would have put him at about the Kevin Magnussen mark on the grid. So great shame for Oscar Piastri, but brilliant reflexes to weave his way through. Lando had a little bit more time to react, but both McLarens in the firing line once that Aston Martin went off and hit the wall. Whew. Yuki Tsunoda was quickest in Q1. He'd just gone quickest, and the two Haas Ferraris had gone up there, beating everybody in the last couple of minutes of Q1 just to get out of that, that zone at the bottom when the track was getting a bit quicker. And then Lance hit the wall, so that put an end to it. We may see an epic drive from Max from the midfield if he survives all the first lap skirmishes, where no doubt there will be from where he is on the grid, he and Sergio. But if he gets through all that and he has a trouble-free race, yeah, of course he can get a good result. I'm not sure he'll be on the podium, but he can be, he'll get some points. But it will hurt him. It'll hurt him. You could say he's won 10 in a row and he's going to win this World Championship. But bottom line, he's as hungry as a dog and wants to win every race. And he'll not be happy about this at all. He will calm down and everything will be working for tomorrow now. But what a tectonic change in Formula One in just one race from where Max was to where Max is now. But then again, on the other side of the coin, that's 2 poles in a row for Carlos Sainz. So in that respect, things are starting to look a lot better for Ferrari. But remember, this is a circuit which is almost tailor-made for that car. It's difficult to imagine the Ferrari being a super quick car relative to the opposition around, say, Suzuka. But here, it's a really good car. It's a really good car for him. Carlos Sainz getting 100% from it. So looking forward to seeing how that works out in race form tomorrow. Thanks to Jetcraft, thanks to Pitbox.io, and thanks to you for watching. See you tomorrow.